Alan LeeDavis beat a pregnant woman so brutally that investigators called her almost beyond recognition. He then turned his .357 Magnum on her two young daughters. But here's what will shock you even more than his crimes: what happened to Davis 17 years later changed American justice forever. One execution. One man. One decision that ended a century-old practice. Stop scrolling. Look at this footage. You're looking at Florida's death chamber. Empty now. Silent. But on July 8, 1999, something occurred here so disturbing that an entire state said never again. Davis weighed 344 pounds. They called him tiny, a cruel joke that would become deadly serious. Prison officials had to build a new chair. Stronger. Bigger. They had no idea they were creating history. What you're about to see isn't just another true crime story. This is about the last man to die in Florida's electric chair. The execution that was so brutal, so shocking, that it forced lawmakers to abandon a method of execution used since 1924. But before we get to that chamber, before we witness what made grown men turn away in horror, you need to understand what Davis did on May 11, 1982. 3 lives. One night. A crime so savage it demanded the ultimate punishment. The question isn't whether Davis deserved to die. The question is whether what happened to him was justice, or something far worse. Stay with me. You won't believe what you're about to discover. May 10, 1982. Jacksonville, Florida. Nancy Weiler tucked her daughters into bed that Tuesday night, unaware she had 18 hours left to live. Kristina, 9 years old, had just finished her math homework. Katherine, 5, clutched her favorite stuffed animal. Nancy, 3 months pregnant with her third child, was planning the nursery. 17 years later, that same pregnancy would be cited in Alan LeeDavis's death warrant. The Weiler family lived on Mayport Road in a middle-class neighborhood where children rode bikes and neighbors knew each other's names. Nancy worked as a secretary. Her husband was away on business. The house sat quiet under streetlights, windows glowing warm against the Florida night. 40 miles away, Alan LeeDavis was making plans of his OWN.AT 6 feet 2 inches and 250 pounds. Davis had terrorized Jacksonville for years. Armed robbery, assault, burglary. Each conviction more violent than the last. On May 11, 1982, he chose the Weiler home for what he thought would be a simple break-in. He was wrong about simple. Nancy's screams would echo through police reports for decades. The blood evidence would fill 37 photographs. The crime scene would haunt detectives until retirement. But here's what makes this case different from every other home invasion you've heard about. What Davis did that night would eventually make him the most important execution in American history. The timeline matters. May 11, 1982, 3 people die in 12 minutes. July 8, 1999, 1 man dies in a way so brutal it changes the law forever. Watch the dates. 6,232 days separate these two events. Every single day the Weiler family waited for justice. Every single day, Davis sat on death row knowing his time would come. When it finally arrived, even his executioners weren't prepared. Florida's electric chair had killed 225 people since 1924. 75 years of executions. Thousands of votes. Hundreds of families seeking closure. But Alan LeeDavis would be different. His size created problems. His weight broke records. His execution would break something else entirely: the public's stomach for watching state-sanctioned death. The Weiler murders took 12 minutes. The investigation took 6 weeks. The trial took 3 months. The appeals took 17 years. Davis's execution took less than 4 minutes. But those 4 minutes would be replayed in courtrooms, legislative hearings, and news broadcasts for decades. Here's what you need to understand before we go any further. This isn't just about one criminal and 3 victims. This is about a moment when America looked in the mirror and decided it didn't like what it saw. Nancy Weiler was planning to name her unborn child Michael. She never got the chance. Alan LeeDavis became the 44th person executed in Florida since the death penalty resumed in 1976. He would also be the last to die by electrocution. The connection between those two facts changes everything. May 11, 1982. 3:17 a.m. Alan LeeDavis jimmied the back door lock on Mayport Road. 2 years state prison. 1978. Aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. 4 years. 1982. Triple homicide. Each conviction taught him something new about violence. Each release made him more dangerous. Prison records show Davis gained 60 pounds during his sentences, spending hours in makeshift gyms, building the body that would intimidate his next victims. The Weiler murders represented his doctoral thesis in brutality. Detective Ray McKinnon tracked Davis for 6 days after the killings. Blood evidence. Fingerprints. Ballistics from the .357 Magnum. The investigation built an airtight case, but McKinnon knew something else. Davis wasn't running. He wanted to be caught, McKinnon would later testify. He sat in that trailer, drinking beer, watching TV, waiting for us to knock on his door. When they arrested him on May 17, 1982, Davis weighed 344 pounds. He said 3 words, "I want coffee." No confession. No remorse. No explanation for why 3 people had to die. $4.200. Court psychiatrist Dr. Michael Marr evaluated Davis for competency. The results chilled the courtroom. Davis understood exactly what he'd done, remembered every detail of the murders, and showed no signs of mental illness or emotional disturbance. He killed them because he felt like it, Dr. Marr testified. Pure, calculated violence. During his trial, Davis sat motionless while prosecutors displayed crime scene photographs. Nancy Weiler's beaten face. Kristina's small body. Katherine's blood-stained bedroom. Other defendants wept, raged, or looked away. Davis studied each photograph with clinical interest as if reviewing his own work. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Death by electrocution. Davis nodded once when the sentence was read, the same way someone might acknowledge a dinner reservation. September 12, 1982. Duval County Courthouse. The prosecution needed 18 minutes to present their case against Alan LeeDavis. 18 minutes to document 3 murders and seal a man's fate. The evidence filled 17 boxes, but prosecutors needed only 3 pieces to guarantee conviction. Davis's fingerprints on Nancy Weiler's jewelry box, ballistics matching his .357 Magnum to the murder weapon, and blood spatter analysis placing him in each room where the killings occurred. Defense attorney Michael Corrin faced an impossible task, defending the indefensible. Corrin couldn't dispute the evidence. Every forensic test confirmed Davis's presence at the crime scene. Witnesses placed him near the Weiler home that night. His own confession to police detailed his movements through the house. The defense strategy became damage control, argue mental illness, childhood trauma, anything to avoid the electric chair. Court-appointed psychiatrists examined Davis for 47 hours over 3 weeks. Their conclusion destroyed Corrin's only hope. Defendant shows no signs of mental illness, demonstrates clear understanding of his actions, and exhibits no remorse for the crimes committed. The jury heard 3 days of testimony. Crime scene photographs. Forensic evidence. Medical examiner reports detailing how Nancy Weiler fought for her life, how Kristina and Katherine died clutching each other. Deliberation lasted 4 hours and 12 minutes. Guilty. First-degree murder. 3 counts. The penalty phase took longer than the trial itself, not because the jury struggled with the decision, but because Florida law required them to consider every mitigating factor. They found none. Recommendation. Death by electrocution. Here's what most people don't understand about death penalty cases. The conviction is just the beginning of a legal marathon that can span decades. Davis's appeals began immediately. Direct appeal to the Florida Supreme Court. Denied. Federal habeas corpus petition. Denied. Successive appeals based on new evidence, ineffective counsel, prosecutorial misconduct. Denied. 17 years. 62 separate legal motions. 14 different judges. 6 different attorneys. Every court reached the same conclusion. Alan LeeDavis received a fair trial, competent representation, and appropriate punishment for his crimes. The Weiler family attended every hearing, every appeal, every legal proceeding for nearly 2 decades. Nancy's husband remarried but never stopped seeking justice for his first wife and daughters. By July 1999, Davis had exhausted every legal option available under American jurisprudence. The only question remaining wasn't whether he would die, but how that death would change America forever. Union Correctional Institution. Cell Qs 14. Alan LeeDavis spent 6,232 days watching other men walk past his cell toward Florida's execution chamber. 23 hours of lockdown. 1 hour of exercise. 17 years of waiting. 44 men died before Davis's number came up. Old Sparky had been Florida's killing machine since 1924. 75 years. 225 executions. Built from Florida oak, reinforced with leather straps and metal restraints that had held everyone from serial killers to cop killers to child murderers. But Davis presented an unprecedented problem. At 344 pounds, he was the heaviest man ever scheduled for electrocution in American history. Prison engineers examined the 75-year-old chair and reached a disturbing conclusion. It might collapse under his weight during the 2,300-volt surge. Florida's solution created more problems than it solved. They built a new electric chair specifically for Alan LeeDavis. Stronger frame. Reinforced seat. Wider restraints. The construction cost $14,000, roughly $4,000 per murder victim. While most of America moved toward lethal injection, Florida clung to electrocution. Nebraska, Alabama, Georgia had all switched. Florida's legislature repeatedly rejected proposals to modernize their execution method. Davis would become the test case for their stubbornness. Prison records show Davis gained 46 pounds during his final 3 years on death row, reaching his maximum weight just months before execution. Whether intentional or coincidental, his size would soon become the center of a national debate about cruel and unusual punishment. Death row guard Marcus Williams worked Q-wing for 12 years. He watched dozens of inmates make their final walk. Davis was different, Williams later testified before the Florida legislature. He knew his execution would be different. 2.3 days before his scheduled execution, Davis requested his final meal: lobster tail, fried shrimp, clams, garlic bread and A&W root beer. Total cost, $37. He also made one unusual request that prison officials initially denied: he wanted to die wearing a diaper. Officials dismissed it as a final act of defiance, but Davis understood something they didn't. His execution would be messier than anyone expected. July 8, 1999. 4:47 p.m. Alan LeeDavis finished his final meal in silence. Lobster tail, fried shrimp, clams, garlic bread, A&W root beer. He ate methodically, leaving only the bread crusts on his plate. At 5:30 p.m., guards escorted him to the execution chamber for the last time. Witnesses filled 12 seats behind reinforced glass. Media representatives. State officials. Nancy Weiler's surviving family members who had waited 17 years for this moment. Davis weighed 344 pounds. The new electric chair groaned under his weight as guards secured the leather restraints across his massive chest, arms and legs. 2 metal electrodes, one attached to his shaved head, another to his right calf. He declined to make a final statement. 6:03 p.m. Warden James Crosby gave the signal. 2,300 volts surged through Davis's body for 10 seconds. Standard procedure called for a brief pause, then a second surge to ensure death. Something went catastrophically wrong. Blood erupted from Davis's nose and mouth during the first electrical surge. Not drops. Not a trickle. A steady flow that spread across his white prison shirt like spilled paint. Witness Susan Carey, representing the Associated Press, later testified, "The blood kept coming. It soaked through his shirt to the size of a dinner plate. We could hear sounds, moaning, gurgling, that lasted much longer than normal executions." Prison officials maintained the bleeding was merely a nosebleed caused by hypertension. Medical examiner Dr. Bell Almajra documented burns on Davis's scalp, leg and other areas where the electrical current had concentrated. At 6:13 p.m., Davis was pronounced dead. 10 minutes of documented agony that would change Florida law forever. Florida Department of Corrections immediately released photographs of the blood-soaked execution, an unprecedented decision that shocked the nation and forced Americans to confront the reality of state-sanctioned death. The images revealed what witnesses knew: Alan LeeDavis didn't just die, he suffered visibly, violently, and very publicly. July 9, 1999. One day after execution. Photographs of Alan LeeDavis's blood-soaked death appeared on front pages across America. The images that Florida officials released to document the execution instead documented something else entirely: the end of an era. Within 6 months, Governor Jeb Bush signed legislation making lethal injection Florida's primary execution method. Davis had become the last person to die in Florida's electric chair, and his death changed the national conversation about capital punishment forever. Nancy Weiler's surviving family released a statement through their attorney: Alan LeeDavis received exactly what he deserved. He showed no mercy to Nancy, Kristina, and Katherine. The state showed him the same consideration he showed our family. But critics argued something different. If executions became torturous spectacles, how were they different from the crimes they punished? Legal scholars pointed to the Eighth Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. The photographs raised uncomfortable questions that persist today. Davis killed 3 innocent people, including an unborn child. He showed no remorse through 17 years of appeals. He died exactly as Florida law prescribed, but was justice served, Or was the state reduced to his level of brutality? Medical examiner reports documented electrical burns covering Davis's body. Witness testimony described 10 minutes of visible agony. Prison officials maintain the execution proceeded according to protocol. The facts speak for themselves. The interpretation depends on your definition of justice. Today, 36 states retain the death penalty. Most use lethal injection.